I was going to title this Why Not My Say-So, and speak to the topic of justification and the epistemic burden which results from our having beliefs. But I also want to share some of the subtle implications I've come to appreciate regarding our confessing that we know something to be the case. In future videos I hope to expand upon this and some of the areas I've brushed up against here. The 20th century philosopher G.E. Moore took on skeptics and idealists in his essays A Defense of Common Sense and The Proof of an External World, and birthed his famous "here is a hand" argument. In this he argued that where one can say here is a hand and here is another, one can be certain of the external world. This too will make an interesting future topic, but my point in bringing him up is to give the context for a portion of Ludwig Wittgenstein's response, some of which is found in what has become one of my favorite books on certainty. It is, if you'll pardon my French, awesome. Now, if you'll pardon my German, Man sehen eben nicht this specialized Gebrauch von ich weiß. I want to apologize to my German audience members. While I enjoy speaking in tongues as much as the next guy, perhaps I should opt for English and retain my European audience. We just do not see how very specialized the use of I know is. For I know seems to describe a state of affairs which guarantees what is known, guarantees it as fact. One always forgets the expression, I thought I knew, for it is not as though the proposition, it is so, could be inferred from someone else's utterance, I know it is so, nor from the utterance together with its not being a lie. But can't I infer it is so from my own utterance, I know, etc.? Yes. And also, there is a hand there follows from the proposition, he knows that there is a hand there. But from his utterance, I know, it does not follow that he knows it. That he does takes some showing. It needs to be shown that no mistake was possible. Giving the assurance I know doesn't suffice, for it is, after all, only an assurance that I can't be making a mistake, and it needs to be objectively established that I'm not making a mistake about that. If I know something, then I also know that I know it, etc. amounts to, I know that means I'm incapable of being wrong about that, but whether I am so needs to be established objectively. Suppose now I say, I'm incapable of being wrong about this. That is a book, while I point to an object. What would a mistake here be like? And have I any clear idea of it? I know often means I have the proper grounds for my statement. So if the other person is acquainted with the language game, he would admit that I know. The other, if he is acquainted with the language game, must be able to imagine how one may know something of the kind. The statement, I know that here is a hand, may then be continued, for it's my hand that I'm looking at. Then a reasonable man will not doubt that I know. What I love in this passage is that through an amazing efficiency of words, Wittgenstein exposes so much of what we take for granted when we play what he termed Sprachspiel, or the language game. Put simply, he viewed areas of discourse as differing language games. That, like games, these are activities we participate in when we communicate using words. These games have what he called a family resemblance between them, but like games, there's no one common feature which unites them. Words can be thought of as the tools of the game, and their use within the context of a particular game is what gives them their meaning for that game. This would be like dice in Yahtzee, having a very different use than in backgammon. Without doing the complexity a disservice, let me just say that for my purposes here, I'm mainly interested in speaking to our mutual understanding of these games when we communicate certain utterances, and that these are tacitly taken for granted for the sake of intelligibility. We regularly utter propositions about the world like, it rained earlier, there are no mugs in the cabinet, or the cat is on the vacuum. But as I pointed out in my last video, what we are uttering are beliefs about what we think to be a fact, not the facts themselves. This is the map and the territory distinction. We are actually stating, I know it rained earlier. I know there are no mugs in the cabinet, or I know the cat is on the vacuum. It is a fact within the state of affairs that it rained earlier, or it did not. But my belief about the fact that it rained earlier is an epistemic matter. That is to say, it's related to my knowledge of the facts, not the facts themselves. When I say that I know it, I'm stating that I believe I am in possession of knowledge concerning a fact. I'm making a claim about the state of affairs as it relates to my having knowledge concerning the rain. And so with this in mind, when Wittgenstein says, one always forgets the expression, I thought I knew, He's pointing out that we can be mistaken in our belief that we were in possession of knowledge. It is that we can say, I was mistaken in thinking I knew that it rained, when in fact it did not. Wittgenstein is reminding us that we can be mistaken when we say we are certain, that when we utter statements like, I know, we are not referring to a fact available to all agents within the state of affairs, but rather offering a psychological disposition. Certainty is a subjective biographical attitude. We are conveying our level of confidence in our belief being true. We regularly say things like, I'm fairly certain, or I'm relatively confident. But in what way could our say-so ensure the veracity of what it is we're saying? For many, when we consider the most direct of experiences, this seems foreign. We can't see how it is we're not privileged to this ground. We want to say something is absolutely certain or 100% guaranteed, but if you notice, this only ever applies to ourselves. When another person states, I guarantee it's the case, do we ever take it as meaning that the person cannot be wrong about it?
Vesper, come to me.
Daddy, is it really you?
Yes, my dear. I guarantee it. Would I lie?
As Wittgenstein says, for it is not as though the proposition it is so could be inferred from someone else's utterance, I know it is so. Were I to say to you, I know it is so, you wouldn't take that to mean that I can't be mistaken. However, in regards to ourselves, but can't I infer it is so from my own utterance I know, etc.? Yes. This is to say that any time we make a claim to know something to be the case, we are tacitly adopting the position that it is in fact the case. From my own utterance I know, I'm asserting that it is so. Yet simply because it equates for us that it is so, and can infer such an attitude on the part of others when they utter I know, that it is so is not guaranteed. Again, as Wittgenstein says, there is a hand there follows from the proposition he knows there's a hand there, but from his utterance, I know, it does not follow that he does know it. That he does know takes some showing. And by showing, Wittgenstein means the process of justifying one's beliefs. Beliefs are caused within us, and justification is the process of rendering what we believe those causes were. Were you to look in the cabinet and find no mugs, the belief would be caused as the world presented itself to you. But 5 minutes from now, as you hold the belief, there are no mugs in the cabinet, you could find yourself to doubt that it's the case. You could wonder if you were remembering events from the day before, and question that you hadn't actually checked today. You could question if you had mistakenly looked in the wrong cabinet. And so, in order to rationally hold the belief there are no mugs in the cabinet, you would need to be able to raise to awareness the rationale by which you believe it to be the case. This is to render an account, by which we gauge the appropriate confidence after the belief is produced to warrant its continued trust. We believe something is or is not the case, but the degree of certainty or doubt is tied to our ability to render the justification. I want now to look at something we take for granted in our language. Let's say that you were to walk into the next room and say to me, there are no mugs in the cabinet. Would I then know it to be the case? No, for while you have a causal story by which to derive some confidence in your knowing it to be the case, I have no such account. Your statement is a dot unconnected. By providing the reasons and evidence thought to have caused the belief, you can begin to persuade me to believe it to be the case as well. But there's a bit more to this. We accept unchallenged assertions like the cat is on the vacuum, or it rained earlier, or there are no mugs in the cabinet all the time, and we act upon them. How are these different? As Wittgenstein says, I know often means I have the proper grounds for my statement, so if the other person is acquainted with the language game, he would admit that I know. The other must be able to imagine how one may know something of the kind. The statement, I know that here is a hand, may then be continued, for it's my hand that I'm looking at. Then a reasonable man will not doubt that I know. This is to say that where we can infer the how, we often are satisfied without having the reasons laid out which would justify the claim. Our inferences of how such a thing can be known act as a weak justification for the sake of expediting communication. Given variables in a matrix that takes into account what we know concerning the individual, the circumstances regarding the claim, or the ramifications of being in error, we determine whether or not to solicit additional justification. In the case of I know it rained earlier, you are familiar with how such a thing is known, and given the consideration of the matrix, you will likely have no reason to ask for how it is I know such a thing. We often assume the justification, where we can infer how it is a given belief about the world can be known. Just as there's no reason to say, I hereby believe that it rained earlier today, where we feel it can be inferred by our audience, we will leave off because I remembered the weather forecast. Then I took a look out the window and I saw some puddles and drips from the rooftops and a series of dark clouds moving away from us. Instead, we'll offer, it rained earlier today. You might want to grab an umbrella in case we get some more. And we'll move on to more interesting topics. We constantly take it for granted that in the case where we can infer how something is known, where we have reason to believe the person sincere, we will not require justification of how one knows. We routinely get burned by these unjustified adoptions. Consider statements like, but I just assumed when you said the house was locked up, you had checked the back door. Or I assumed when you said you had no money, you had checked your wallet. Hollywood makes blockbusters leveraging such assumptions.
I see dead people.
And everyone knows when you make an assumption, you make an ass out of you and umption.
In your dreams?
When we can't infer how it is known or have reason to doubt the speaker, we will require a coherent accounting. Justification connects the beliefs to the means by which they were caused, both for the claims of others and for our own positions. Justification is the only means by which to reflect upon and evaluate our own epistemic attitudes. It's critical in protecting us from our own biases. Given all of this, in the event that we experience an allergy to the burden of justifying our beliefs, or where we find a fallacious excuse by which to reject taking on board of an argument, we should take those as signs that perhaps we are wanting a level of confidence or doubt to which we are not entitled. Burdens of justification are not some bit of legalistic tedium. They are the means by which we protect ourselves from our own biases, and the means by which we ensure we are on the path to true beliefs and successful interactions with what they are about. And that is why not my say-so, unless you decide to trust me. Look for more videos in the future. Thank you.